Welcome to Shadow Frames, where we explore the darkest corners of history's forgotten tales. Tonight, we journey back to the autumn of 1897, when the leaves turned golden in the quaint town of Blackwood Grove. It was a time when gaslights cast long shadows across cobblestone streets, when superstition lingered in the corners of even the most rational minds, and when mirrors were covered during thunderstorms, lest they capture a soul in their silvery depths. Our story begins with the Harrington family, Edward, a respected physician, his wife Eleanor, and their newborn son, James. The Harringtons had recently moved into Willow House, a handsome Victorian manor on the outskirts of town, inherited from Edward's late uncle. The day was September 15, 1897, when a delivery wagon pulled up to the grand entrance of Willow House. The driver, a weathered man with fingers stained by tobacco, unloaded a peculiar item wrapped in layers of brown paper and twine, a gift from Eleanor's sister in London. "Careful with that, sir," Eleanor called from the doorway, her voice tinged with excitement. "My sister wrote that it's quite old and valuable." The package was brought into the drawing room, where Edward carefully cut away the protective layers to reveal a mirror unlike any they had seen before. It was an ornate nursery mirror, its frame carved from dark walnut wood, adorned with intricate patterns of vines and cherubic faces. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the details so fine they seemed to have been carved by impossibly delicate hands. "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, tracing her fingers along the wooden frame. "Charlotte wrote that it belonged to a noble family in Vienna. Apparently, it has been passed down for generations, always placed in the nursery to watch over the children." Edward smiled, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. "A fitting gift for our James, then. Let's have it placed in the nursery immediately." The mirror was carefully carried upstairs to the nursery, a room painted in soft blues and decorated with illustrations from fairy tales. Martha, the nursemaid, was rocking baby James when the mirror was brought in. Her eyes narrowed slightly as the workers positioned it on the wall opposite the crib. "Is something the matter, Martha?" Eleanor asked, noticing the woman's expression. Martha quickly composed herself. "Not at all, ma'am. It's a fine piece, it is. Just, my grandmother always said mirrors in nurseries invite watchers from the other side." Edward chuckled. "Superstitious nonsense. The Austrians have placed mirrors in nurseries for centuries. It helps the child develop self-recognition." Martha nodded obediently, but her eyes remained fixed on the mirror's reflective surface. "As you say, sir." That night, as an autumn storm battered against the windows of Willow House, Eleanor sat in the nursery, rocking James to sleep. The room was illuminated by a single oil lamp, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Eleanor hummed a lullaby, her voice soft and melodic. "Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee, all through the night." As she sang, Eleanor's eyes drifted to the mirror. In its reflection, she could see herself, the gentle sway of the rocking chair, and James cradled in her arms. The baby's eyes were closed, his breathing steady and peaceful. But something caught Eleanor's attention, something odd about the reflection. She tilted her head, trying to discern what seemed out of place. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, the lamp's flame dancing in the draught. She rose from the chair and approached the mirror, James still nestled against her chest. The reflection showed them clearly. Eleanor in her nightgown, her long hair braided for sleep, and James swaddled in his white blanket. She smiled at their image, but as she turned to leave, a cold sensation ran down her spine. In the mirror, for just a moment, she thought she saw something unusual, not quite right. But when she looked again, there was only her reflection, holding James exactly as she was in reality. "My imagination," she murmured, returning to the rocking chair. Too many of Martha's folk tales. The following days passed without incident. The Harrington household settled into its routine, with Edward attending to his patients in town, Eleanor managing the household affairs, and Martha caring for little James. The mirror became an unremarkable fixture in the nursery, admired occasionally by visitors for its craftsmanship, but otherwise forgotten, until one afternoon in early October, Eleanor had invited several ladies from town for tea. As was customary, she proudly showed them the nursery, where James was sleeping peacefully in his crib. The women cooed and admired the baby, commenting on his angelic features and the lovely decor of the room. "What a magnificent mirror," remarked Mrs. Whitmore, the banker's wife. "Italian? Austrian, actually," Eleanor replied. "A gift from my sister." Mrs. Whitmore approached the mirror, admiring her own reflection. Such clarity. Modern mirrors simply don't compare to these old silvered ones. As the women chatted, Martha entered with fresh linens. She moved quietly so as not to disturb the sleeping child. But as she passed by Mrs. Whitmore, she glanced at the mirror and froze, the linens tumbling from her arms to the floor. "Martha," Eleanor exclaimed. "Whatever is the matter?" The nursemaid's face had drained of color. "The mirror, ma'am," she whispered. "The mirror." The women turned to look, but saw nothing unusual, just their own reflection standing in the nursery. "What about it?" Mrs. Whitmore asked, frowning. Martha blinked rapidly, then shook her head. "Nothing, ma'am. Forgive me. I thought I saw, but it was nothing. My eyes playing tricks." She hastily gathered the fallen linens and excused herself, leaving the ladies puzzled by her behavior. "The Irish are so superstitious," Mrs. Whitmore said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "My cook refuses to sleep with a mirror in her room, claims it steals her dreams." The women laughed, and the incident was forgotten. But that evening, as Eleanor recounted the story to Edward over dinner, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. "Martha seemed genuinely frightened, Edward. I've never seen her like that before." Edward cut into his roast beef. "Servants often bring their country superstitions with them. Remember how our cook in London refused to bring bird feathers into the house? Yes, but Martha is usually so level-headed. Perhaps I should speak with her." Later that night, Eleanor found Martha in the kitchen, preparing a bottle for James's midnight feeding. "Martha, about today in the nursery." The nursemaid kept her eyes on her task. "It was nothing, ma'am. Just a foolish fancy." "Please, Martha, tell me what you saw." Martha hesitated, then sighed. "You'll think me mad, ma'am. I promise I won't." Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. "In the mirror, when Mrs. Whitmore was standing there, I saw the baby in his crib just as he was in the room. But in the reflection, there was a hand resting on his chest. A woman's hand with long fingers. Not yours, ma'am, not mine, not any of the ladies." A chill ran through Eleanor. "A hand?" "Yes, ma'am. Just a hand, as if someone was standing over the crib, but there was no one there to be seen except the hand. And then, when I looked again, it was gone." Eleanor couldn't sleep that night. Martha's words echoed in her mind as she tossed and turned beside her peacefully slumbering husband. Finally, unable to rest, she lit a candle and made her way to the nursery. The room was silent except for James's soft breathing. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a silvery glow across the floor. Eleanor approached the crib and looked down at her son, his tiny fists curled beside his head, his face serene in sleep. Slowly, she turned toward the mirror. In its reflection, she could see the crib, and James sleeping just as he was. Nothing seemed amiss. She sighed, feeling foolish for allowing Martha's superstitions to affect her so. Then, as she watched, a shadow seemed to move across the reflected crib. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She looked back at the real crib. Nothing had changed. James still slept undisturbed. But in the mirror, she forced herself to look again at the reflection. There, resting gently on James's blanket, was a woman's hand, slender, pale, with long, delicate fingers, adorned with a single gold ring. Eleanor gasped, nearly dropping her candle. The hand in the reflection didn't move, just remained there, resting possessively on her child. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. No answer came, but as she watched, horrified, the fingers in the reflection seemed to stroke the baby's cheek with terrible tenderness. Eleanor rushed to the crib and snatched James into her arms. The baby woke with a startled cry. She held him tight against her chest, her heart pounding, and looked back at the mirror. The reflection showed her exactly as she was, holding James, her face pale with fear. The mysterious hand was gone. "Eleanor, what's happening?" Edward stood in the doorway, his hair mussed from sleep, his expression concerned. "The mirror," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. There was a hand, touching James in the reflection, but not in reality. Edward frowned and entered the room. He examined the mirror carefully, running his fingers along its frame and peering at its surface. "There's nothing here, my dear. Just an ordinary mirror, albeit a finely crafted one. I saw it, Edward, just as Martha did this afternoon." Edward sighed and put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "You've been overwrought lately, and Martha's superstitious talk has affected you. Perhaps you're not getting enough rest." "I'm not imagining things," Eleanor insisted, but even as she spoke, doubt crept into her mind. Had she really seen a hand, or was it just a shadow, a trick of the moonlight? Edward led her back to their bedroom, taking James with them. The baby can sleep in our room tonight, if it will ease your mind. And tomorrow I'll have the mirror moved to another room if you wish." Eleanor nodded, but couldn't shake the memory of those pale fingers touching her child. The next morning, Edward arranged for the mirror to be moved to the guest bedroom, despite Eleanor's insistence that it be removed from the house entirely. "It's a valuable piece, Eleanor," he explained. "We can't simply discard it because of a shadow seen in the night." Eleanor reluctantly agreed, but made a private resolution to write to her sister Charlotte and ask about the mirror's history. Perhaps there was something Charlotte hadn't mentioned, some story attached to the ornate piece that might explain the strange occurrences. "My dearest Charlotte," she wrote, "thank you for the beautiful nursery mirror, which is indeed a work of exceptional craftsmanship. I wonder, though, if you might share with me any information you have about its previous owners. Has anyone ever mentioned any unusual qualities about the piece?" The letter was posted that afternoon. While waiting for a reply, Eleanor avoided the guest bedroom entirely and instructed Martha to do the same. Edward, concerned about his wife's anxiety, invited his colleague Dr. Fleming to dinner, hoping the man's rational conversation might ease Eleanor's troubled mind. A physician's wife believing in haunted mirrors. Dr. Fleming chuckled after Edward had related a sanitized version of the events. What would the medical society say? Eleanor forced a smile. It sounds absurd when put that way. "The mind is a powerful thing, Mrs. Harrington," Dr. Fleming said, sipping his wine, "especially a mind fatigued by new motherhood. Visual hallucinations are not uncommon in states of exhaustion." "Of course," Eleanor murmured, though she knew what she had seen was no hallucination. The conversation moved to other topics, but later, as Dr. Fleming was preparing to leave, he paused in the foyer. "You know, Harrington, your mention of that Austrian mirror reminded me of something. There was a case some years ago in Vienna. A nobleman's family reported strange occurrences with an antique mirror. Mass hysteria, of course, but it caused quite a stir in certain circles." Edward raised an eyebrow. "What kind of occurrences?" Dr. Fleming shrugged. "Oh, the usual superstitious nonsense. Figures appearing in the reflection that weren't present in the room, objects moving on their own. The family eventually had the mirror removed and supposedly buried on unconsecrated ground." He laughed. "Imagine that, burying a mirror like a vampire." Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "Do you recall the family's name?" Something German. Schroeder, Schönborn. I can't quite remember. It was many years ago, and as I said, merely an interesting case of collective delusion. Good night to you both." As soon as Dr. Fleming had left, Eleanor turned to Edward. "It must be the same mirror. We must get rid of it, Edward." Edward sighed. "Eleanor, please. Dr. Fleming's story proves nothing. It was likely just gossip among the Viennese aristocracy. Then why did Charlotte not mention this history when she sent it? Perhaps she doesn't know. Or perhaps she didn't think it worth mentioning a silly superstition." Their conversation was interrupted by James's cries. Martha called down that the baby was hungry, and Eleanor hurried upstairs to tend to her son. 3 days later, a reply came from Charlotte. "My dear sister," Charlotte wrote, "I'm somewhat alarmed by your inquiry about the mirror. I purchased it from an antique dealer in Knightsbridge who assured me it was a fine piece from a noble Austrian household. He mentioned nothing unusual about it, and I noticed nothing myself during the brief time it was in my possession. However, your letter prompted me to visit the dealer again and inquire further. He was reluctant to speak at first, but eventually admitted that the mirror had come from the estate of the Schönborn family in Vienna. Apparently, the last countess died under mysterious circumstances in 1873, and her husband sold off many of their possessions before moving to Switzerland. The dealer seemed uncomfortable discussing the piece further, but did say one curious thing as I was leaving. He asked if anyone in your household had noticed extra appendages in the reflection. When I pressed him on this strange question, he hurriedly claimed it was just an old wives' tale associated with some Viennese mirrors of that period. I hope this helps, though I fear it may only add to any concerns you might have. If you are truly uncomfortable with the piece, perhaps it would be best to sell it to another dealer. There are many collectors who value such items for their craftsmanship alone and care nothing for superstitious tales. Your loving sister, Charlotte." Eleanor's hands trembled as she finished reading. Extra appendages. The dealer had known about the hand in the reflection. This was no hallucination, no trick of tired eyes. She immediately sought out Edward in his study and showed him the letter. "You see, there is something wrong with that mirror. We must remove it from the house at once." Edward frowned as he read Charlotte's words. This is certainly unusual, but still not proof of anything supernatural, Eleanor. Edward, please. For James's sake. Edward looked at his wife's pleading face and sighed. Very well. I'll arrange for it to be taken to the attic tomorrow. Will that satisfy you? Eleanor wanted the mirror out of the house entirely, but knew this was the most concession she was likely to get from her rational husband. For now, she agreed. The next day, 2 workmen carried the mirror to the attic, a spacious but dusty room under the eaves of Willow House. Eleanor watched with relief as the door was closed on the troubling object. For several weeks, life returned to normal. James grew and thrived, beginning to smile and recognize his parents. Martha gradually relaxed her vigilance, no longer making the sign of the cross when passing the attic stairs. Eleanor began to wonder if perhaps her fears had been exaggerated after all. Then, in late November, as the first snow fell over Blackwood Grove, a series of small, troubling incidents began. It started with James's behavior. The previously content baby became fussy and difficult to soothe. He would stare fixedly at corners of the nursery, his eyes tracking something invisible. At night, he would wake screaming, his tiny face contorted in terror. It's just colic, Edward assured Eleanor. Perfectly normal at his age. But Eleanor wasn't convinced, especially when she noticed something else, a cold spot in the nursery, directly where the mirror had hung. No matter how high they stoked the fire, that one wall remained ice-cold to the touch. Then came the sounds, a soft tapping that seemed to come from inside the walls, following a distinct pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 slow ones. It happened most often at night, but occasionally during the day as well. Old houses make noises, Edward said dismissively when Eleanor mentioned it. The timber contracts in the cold. But Martha had grown pale again, and took to wearing a small silver cross around her neck. One afternoon, while Edward was attending to patients in town, Eleanor was changing James's diaper when she heard the now familiar tapping coming from above, from the direction of the attic. Tap, 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 tap. Securing James in his crib, she stood listening, her heart racing. The tapping came again, more insistent this time. Tap, 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 tap. Eleanor called for Martha, who appeared in the doorway, her expression wary. Do you hear that? Martha nodded, clutching her cross. It's been getting louder, ma'am, for days now. From the attic, from the mirror. Yes, ma'am, I believe so. Eleanor took a deep breath. I need to see it again, Martha. The mirror. Will you come with me? Martha's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded. I will, ma'am. Stay with James, Eleanor instructed. I'll call for you when I need you. The attic was cold and dim, illuminated only by the gray winter light filtering through a small round window. Dust motes danced in the air as Eleanor pushed open the door. The room was crowded with furniture and trunks from previous generations of Edward's family. Chairs with worn upholstery, tables with peeling veneer, leather-bound books in sagging crates. And there, propped against the far wall, was the mirror, covered with a sheet that had once been white, but was now gray with dust. Eleanor approached it slowly, her footsteps creaking on the old floorboards. The tapping had stopped as soon as she entered the attic, but now there was another sound, a soft, barely audible humming, like a woman singing a lullaby from very far away. With trembling fingers, Eleanor grasped the edge of the sheet. She hesitated for a moment, then pulled it away, releasing a cloud of dust that made her cough. The mirror stood revealed, its dark wooden frame seeming even more ornate in the dim light, the carved cherubs watching her with blank eyes. At first, Eleanor saw only her own reflection, pale, frightened, her hair escaping from its pins. But as she stared, the reflection began to shift, not dramatically but subtly, as if the silver behind the glass was rippling like water. Who are you? Eleanor whispered. What do you want with my son? The reflection stilled, showing only Eleanor standing in the dusty attic. But then, slowly, a mist seemed to form in the glass, coalescing into a shape behind Eleanor's reflection. The indistinct figure of a woman in old-fashioned dress, her face obscured, her hands extended as if reaching for something, or someone. Eleanor gasped and spun around, but there was no one behind her in the real attic. When she looked back at the mirror, the misty figure was still there, closer now to Eleanor's reflection, one pale hand outstretched. What do you want? Eleanor asked again, her voice stronger now, fueled by maternal protective instinct. The figure in the mirror didn't respond, but the humming grew louder, resolving into a recognizable melody, the same lullaby Eleanor often sang to James. Sleep, my child. and peace attend thee all through the night. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind Eleanor. She whirled around to see Martha standing in the doorway, her face ashen. "Martha, I thought I told you to stay with James." "He's here, ma'am," Martha said, her voice trembling. She stepped aside to reveal James's empty bassinet, which she had carried up to the attic. "What? Why would you bring him here?" Eleanor rushed forward, but the bassinet was indeed empty. "Where is James? Martha, where is my baby?" Martha's eyes were wide with terror. "I didn't bring him, ma'am. The bassinet, it moved on its own, up the stairs, floating like it was carried by invisible hands." "I followed it, calling for you, but you didn't answer." "That's impossible," Eleanor began, but her words died in her throat as she turned back to the mirror. In the reflection, the misty woman was now clearly visible, and in her arms she held a baby, James. The woman's face was still obscured, but she was rocking the child gently, humming her lullaby. "Give him back!" Eleanor screamed, rushing toward the mirror. "Give me back my son!" The woman in the mirror tilted her head, as if considering the request. Then, slowly, she extended her arms, offering the baby. Without thinking, driven by maternal desperation, Eleanor reached toward the mirror. To her shock and horror, her hand passed through the glass as if it were water, creating ripples across the reflective surface. Martha screamed behind her, "Mrs. Harrington, no!" But Eleanor couldn't stop. She could see James just on the other side, could almost touch him. She pushed her arm further into the mirror, feeling a cold so intense it burned her skin. The glass rippled around her arm like quicksilver, just as her fingers brushed what felt like fabric, a baby's blanket. Strong hands grabbed her from behind and pulled her back. Eleanor fell to the floor, her arm slipping free of the mirror with a sound like ice cracking. Edward stood over her, his face pale with shock. "Eleanor, what in God's name are you doing?" "James?" Eleanor gasped, her arm numb and throbbing where it had entered the mirror. "She has James, in the mirror." Edward helped his wife to her feet, his expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Martha sent the stable boy for me. She said you were behaving strangely." He looked around the attic. "Where is James?" "There." Eleanor pointed at the mirror. "Look." Edward turned to the mirror, which now showed only the three of them standing in the dusty attic. Edward, Eleanor, and Martha hovering fearfully by the door. There was no sign of the misty woman or the baby. "I don't see anything unusual," Edward said gently. "He was there. A woman was holding him in the mirror." Eleanor's voice rose hysterically. "My hand went through the glass." Edward examined her arm, which was red, and felt frozen to the touch. "You've hurt yourself somehow." "Come downstairs, Eleanor. You need to rest." "Not without James." "James is fine," Edward assured her. "He's in his crib in the nursery. I looked in on him before coming up here." Eleanor stared at her husband in confusion. But Martha said, "The bassinet." They both turned to look at Martha, who was shaking, her eyes fixed on the mirror. "I saw it too, sir," she whispered. "The woman in the mirror, holding the baby. But now, she's gone." Edward sighed deeply. "This has gone far enough." "You've both worked yourselves into a state over this piece of furniture. Martha, go down and check on James. Eleanor, come with me. You need laudanum and rest." Martha hurried down to the nursery while Edward led a reluctant Eleanor to their bedroom. He mixed a dose of laudanum and water and made her drink it, then helped her into bed. "Rest now," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'll check on James and be back shortly." As the laudanum began to take effect, Eleanor fought to keep her eyes open. "Edward," she murmured, "promise me. Get rid of the mirror. Destroy it." Edward hesitated, then nodded. "I promise. Now sleep." Eleanor's eyes closed, the drug pulling her down into darkness. When Eleanor woke, the room was dark except for a single candle burning on the bedside table. She felt groggy from the laudanum, her thoughts slow and confused. For a moment, she couldn't remember why she was in bed in the middle of the day. Then it all came rushing back. The mirror, the misty woman, James. "James," she gasped, sitting up too quickly, making her head spin. "He's fine," came Edward's voice from the chair beside the bed, sleeping peacefully in his crib. Eleanor turned to her husband, relief washing over her. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she noticed something strange about Edward's posture. He was sitting too still, his hands gripping the arms of the chair as if in pain. "Edward, what's wrong?" When he spoke, his voice was strained. "I went to the attic after you fell asleep. I was going to have the mirror removed, as I promised." Eleanor's heart began to race. "And?" I saw it, Eleanor. What you and Martha described. Not at first, but as I was examining the frame, the reflection. I changed. There was a woman just as you said, and she was holding something. Not James, but something. Eleanor swung her legs out of bed, fighting the dizziness from the laudanum. Tell me. Edward's face was pale in the candlelight. She showed me things in the mirror. The past, I think. Her past. He swallowed hard. Her name was Countess Elisabetta Schönborn. She lost her child in 1873. The baby died of fever, and in her grief, she took her own life, hanged herself in the nursery, in front of the mirror. Eleanor gasped. The Schönborn family from Charlotte's letter. Edward nodded. After her death, strange things began happening in the house. The Count claimed to see his wife in mirrors, always reaching for something. For their child, I suppose. He sold most of their possessions and fled to Switzerland. But why is she fixated on James? Why our son? Edward's hands tightened on the chair arms. I don't know. Perhaps she seeks to replace the child she lost. Or perhaps, he hesitated. Perhaps she believes she can prevent what happened to her child by taking ours. Eleanor stood up, steadying herself against the bedpost. We need to destroy the mirror, Edward. Now, tonight. I tried, Edward said quietly. I took a hammer to it, but the glass wouldn't break. It rippled under the blows, like water, but wouldn't shatter. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. Then we'll burn it. The frame wouldn't catch fire. I held a lamp to it for several minutes, and the wood remained cold to the touch. They both froze, listening to the familiar pattern coming from above. Where's Martha? Eleanor asked suddenly. I sent her to bed after checking on James. The poor woman was distraught. Eleanor moved toward the door. I need to see James. Edward rose to follow her. Together they walked down the hallway to the nursery. The tapping continued overhead, growing louder as they approached James's room. Tap, 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 tap. The nursery was dark and cold when they entered. Eleanor immediately went to the crib, while Edward lit the lamp on the dresser. James lay in his crib, sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling with each breath. Eleanor reached down to touch his cheek, reassuring herself of his presence. See, he's fine, Edward said, coming to stand beside her. But as the lamp's light spread through the room, Eleanor gasped in horror. There, on the wall where the mirror had originally hung, was a dark, wet stain spreading across the wallpaper. A stain in the shape of a mirror. Edward, she whispered, pointing. Before Edward could respond, the tapping overhead changed to a new pattern, more urgent. Tap, 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 and then silence. The temperature in the room plummeted suddenly, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The lamp flickered, its flame bending as if in a strong draft. We need to leave, Edward said, his voice tight with fear. Now, take James and go downstairs. Eleanor lifted James from his crib, wrapping him tightly in his blanket. The baby stirred but didn't wake. She moved toward the door but stopped in the doorway, turning back to her husband. Edward? Edward was staring at the stain on the wall, which had stopped spreading but now glistened wetly in the lamplight. I'll be right behind you. Go. Reluctantly, Eleanor hurried down the stairs, cradling James against her chest. The house was eerily silent now. No tapping, no distant lullaby, just the sound of her own rapid breathing and the creak of the stairs beneath her feet. She reached the drawing room and placed James on the sofa, surrounding him with cushions to prevent him from rolling off. Then she stoked the fire, building it up to combat the unnatural cold that seemed to have invaded the entire house. Edward? She called, her voice echoing in the quiet house. Edward, please come down. No answer came. Eleanor paced the drawing room, glancing repeatedly at the doorway, expecting her husband to appear at any moment. 5 minutes passed, then 10. James slept on, undisturbed by his mother's anxiety. Finally, unable to bear the waiting any longer, Eleanor moved to the doorway. Edward? She called up the stairs. Can you hear me? Silence answered her. Making a quick decision, Eleanor arranged the cushions more securely around James, then hurried to the kitchen. She found a large carving knife and a silver candlestick, arming herself as best she could against whatever unknown threat lurked in her home. The journey back upstairs was the longest of Eleanor's life. Each step seemed to take an eternity, the weight of dread growing heavier with every inch she ascended. The upper floor was dark, the hallway stretching before her like a tunnel into nothingness. Edward? She called again, her voice small in the pressing silence. She checked their bedroom first. Empty. Then she moved toward the nursery, the knife clutched tightly in her right hand, the heavy candlestick in her left. The nursery door stood open, but the room beyond was dark, the lamp extinguished. Eleanor paused in the doorway, straining to see in the gloom. "Edward, are you in here?" A soft sound came from the corner of the room, a quiet sob like someone trying to stifle their crying. Eleanor fumbled with the matches in her pocket, finally managing to light the candlestick. The flame illuminated the room in a small circle of light, revealing the empty crib, the rocking chair, the changing table, and Edward, sitting on the floor in the corner, his back to her, his shoulders shaking. "Edward, what's happened? Are you hurt?" He didn't respond, didn't turn, just continued that soft, broken sobbing. Eleanor approached slowly, the candle held high. "Edward, please, you're frightening me." When she was just a few steps away, Edward spoke, but his voice was wrong, higher, with an accent Eleanor had never heard from him before. "He's beautiful," Edward said, still not turning. "So perfect, just like my Friedrich." Eleanor stopped, ice flooding her veins. "Edward." Slowly, Edward turned to face her. In the candlelight, his features seemed distorted, his eyes too wide, his mouth curved in an unnatural smile. In his arms, he cradled an invisible bundle, rocking it gently. "Isn't he beautiful?" Edward asked again, in that wrong voice. "My son has returned to me." Eleanor took a step back. "You're not Edward. Where is my husband?" Edward's face twisted in confusion, then anger. "He tried to separate me from my child again. I couldn't allow that." His gaze dropped to the invisible bundle in his arms. "No one will take you from me again, my little one. Not your father, not this woman. No one." "Where is Edward?" Eleanor demanded, raising the knife. "What have you done with him?" Edward, or the thing wearing Edward's face, smiled serenely. "He's safe, in the mirror, where I was for so long." He looked up at Eleanor, his eyes suddenly black in the candlelight. "And soon you'll join him. Then we can be a family again. Myself, Friedrich, and my faithful servants." Eleanor backed toward the door. "You're the Countess, Elisabetta Schönborn." Edward's head tilted at an impossible angle. "You know my name. Good. You will address me as my lady when you serve me." "I will never serve you," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her terror. "And you will never have my son." The thing wearing Edward's face stood up, still cradling its invisible bundle. "Your son?" "No, this is my Friedrich. You are confused, servant." It took a step toward Eleanor, moving with a strange gliding motion that wasn't quite right, as if Edward's body was being puppeteered by inexperienced hands. "Stay back," Eleanor warned, brandishing the knife. The thing smiled, Edward's face stretching unnaturally. "You cannot harm me with that. I am beyond such things now." As it spoke, a dark stain began to spread across Edward's shirt collar, a thin line of wetness circling his throat, like a wound opening. Eleanor bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. She tugged frantically at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "You cannot leave," the thing said, its voice changing, becoming more feminine, more accented. "None of us can leave. This is our home now. My home, as it always should have been." Eleanor turned to face the creature, her back pressed against the door. "What do you want?" "I want what was taken from me," it said, taking another gliding step forward. "My child, my life, my future. The Count took everything from me when he let our son die. He claimed it was fever, but I know the truth. He was jealous of my love for Friedrich. He neglected the child deliberately while I was away, and when I confronted him, he..." The dark line around Edward's throat widened, blood now visibly seeping through the shirt. "He silenced me. Permanently." Eleanor's mind raced. The mirror was somehow acting as a conduit for this vengeful spirit, allowing the dead Countess to cross between worlds. And now she had taken control of Edward, trapping his consciousness in the mirror just as hers had been trapped for decades. "If what you say is true, then I'm sorry for your loss," Eleanor said carefully. "But James is not your Friedrich, and Edward is not the Count who wronged you. All men are the same," the Countess hissed through Edward's mouth. "All would separate a mother from her child if it suited them. Your Edward is no different. He tried to destroy my mirror, my only connection to this world, to protect our son," Eleanor countered, as any father would. The Countess paused, considering this. "Perhaps, but it matters not. I have waited too long, suffered too much in the cold darkness of the mirror world. I will have a life again, and a child to love, at the expense of my family," Eleanor said. "How does that make you any better than the Count who wronged you?" The Countess's borrowed face twisted in rage. "Do not compare me to him. I am a mother reclaiming what should be mine." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "You're a ghost stealing what belongs to others because you cannot accept your own fate." With an inhuman shriek, the Countess lunged forward, Edward's body moving with unnatural speed. Eleanor dodged to the side, the knife slashing out instinctively. The blade connected with Edward's arm, drawing blood, but the Countess seemed not to notice, whirling around for another attack. "I'll kill you," the Countess snarled, "and take your child as my own. No one will know the difference. The mirror preserves, you see. Keeps you young, keeps you waiting." Eleanor backed away, her mind working frantically. The mirror was the key. The Countess's power seemed tied to it. If she could somehow force the spirit back into the mirror and then destroy it. "The mirror," Eleanor said suddenly. "Show me. Show me what happened to you and Friedrich. Help me understand." The Countess hesitated, Edward's bloodied face registering surprise. "You wish to see?" "Yes, in the mirror. Show me your story." The Countess considered this, then smiled slowly. "Yes, you should know. You should see what men are capable of before you die." Edward's body moved toward the door, unlocking it with a wave of his hand. "Follow," the Countess commanded, gliding into the hallway. Eleanor followed at a distance, the knife still gripped tightly in her hand. They ascended the stairs to the attic, the Countess moving with that strange, floating gait that made Edward's body seem like a marionette. The attic was freezing when they entered, their breath forming thick clouds in the air. The mirror stood uncovered against the far wall, its surface no longer reflective but swirling with mist, like a window into another world. "Behold," the Countess said, gesturing toward the mirror. "My truth." The mist in the mirror parted, revealing scenes from another time, another place. A grand Viennese mansion in the 1870s. A beautiful dark-haired woman, Elisabetta, cradling an infant. A stern-faced man watching them with cold eyes. Arguments, tears. Elisabetta departing in a carriage, begging her husband to care for their son in her brief absence. The scenes shifted. The baby, Friedrich, crying in his crib, unattended. The Count ignoring his son's distress, drinking heavily in his study. Friedrich's face, flushed with fever. A doctor arriving too late. Elisabetta returning to find her child dead. Her anguish, her rage, her accusations. The final scene. Elisabetta in the nursery, standing before this very mirror, a rope in her hands. The Count entering, his face twisted with anger. A struggle, the rope around Elisabetta's neck. Not suicide, murder. The Count staging her death to appear self-inflicted, then fleeing with his dark secret. The mirror's surface rippled, and the scenes faded, replaced by the swirling mist once more. "Now you see," the Countess said through Edward's lips. "Now you understand." Eleanor stared at the mirror, horror and pity mingling in her heart. "I do understand. You were wrong terribly. But this," she gestured at Edward's possessed body, "this won't bring Friedrich back. Nothing will. But I can have a new life," the Countess insisted. "Your son, your husband's body, your home, all mine now." "And what of me?" Eleanor asked. "Will you murder me as your husband murdered you?" The Countess smiled. "No need. The mirror hungers. It will take you, preserve you, as it did me. A fitting punishment, to watch your life being lived by another, unable to intervene." As she spoke, the mist in the mirror began to reach outward, tendrils of silvery vapor extending into the attic like ghostly arms. Eleanor backed away. "No, I won't let you take my family. You cannot stop me," the Countess said confidently. "The mirror's power grows stronger each day. Soon I will be fully corporeal in this world, and your Edward will be nothing but a fading reflection." The mist continued to advance, surrounding Eleanor, cold and clammy against her skin. She could feel it pulling at her, trying to draw her toward the mirror's surface. In desperation, Eleanor raised the knife, but not toward the Countess. Instead, she placed the blade against her own palm and drew it across her skin, wincing as blood welled from the wound. "What are you doing?" the Countess demanded, Edward's face showing confusion. Without answering, Eleanor lunged forward and pressed her bloodied hand against the mirror's surface. The glass rippled beneath her touch, and a high-pitched keening filled the attic, like a woman screaming from very far away. The mist recoiled, retreating back into the mirror. The Countess staggered, Edward's body convulsing as if in pain. "Blood of the living," Eleanor said, remembering Martha's folktales. repels the dead. The Countess shrieked, a sound no human throat could make. You know nothing. Your petty superstitions cannot harm me. But Edward's body continued to convulse, the Countess's control clearly weakening. Eleanor pressed her advantage, smearing more blood across the mirror's frame, around the carved cherubs that now seemed to grimace in pain. Return my husband, Eleanor demanded. Release him from the mirror. Never, the Countess spat. He is mine now, as your child soon will be. James. Eleanor's heart clenched with fear. She had left him alone downstairs, protected only by cushions and distance from this vengeful spirit. Edward, Eleanor called, addressing not the Countess but her trapped husband. Edward, if you can hear me, fight her. Come back to us. To me and James. Edward's body went rigid, his eyes rolling back in his head. When he spoke again, it was with a strangled voice that shifted between Edward's natural tones and the Countess's accented speech. Eleanor, help. She's too strong. The mirror. Break it. I tried, Eleanor cried. It won't break. Not from outside, Edward gasped, fighting for control of his own voice. From inside. I can, if you keep her busy. The Countess reasserted control, Edward's face contorting in rage. Silence. You are mine, body and soul. Eleanor understood what she had to do. She needed to distract the Countess, to weaken her hold on Edward long enough for him to break the mirror from within. But how? An idea came to her. Terrible, dangerous, but perhaps their only chance. Countess Elisabetta, Eleanor said formally, I offer you a trade. Edward's face turned toward her, suspicious but interested. What trade could you possibly offer me? Myself for my husband. Release Edward, and I will enter the mirror willingly. The Countess laughed, a chilling sound from Edward's throat. You think me a fool? Once your husband is free, you would both try to destroy me. I give you my word, Eleanor said solemnly. And more than that, I offer you something you truly want. And what might that be? Understanding. Companionship. I am a mother as you were. I know your pain, your loss. In the mirror world, we could share that understanding. Isn't that better than an unwilling captive who will fight you at every turn? The Countess hesitated, something like longing flickering across Edward's borrowed features. You would willingly join me? Share my exile? Yes, Eleanor said. If you release my husband and swear never to harm my son. Eleanor, no. Edward's voice broke through briefly before being suppressed again. The Countess was silent for a long moment, considering. Then slowly she nodded. Very well. A trade. But you must enter the mirror first before I release him. Eleanor stepped forward, her bloodied hand extended. Swear it. Swear on Friedrich's memory that you will release Edward and never harm James. The Countess flinched at the mention of her son's name, but then straightened, raising Edward's right hand. I swear it, on my beloved Friedrich's soul, your husband for you, your son's safety for your eternal companionship. Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself. Then I accept. She approached the mirror, its surface now calm, reflecting the attic normally except for a faint mist around the edges. As she neared it, the glass began to ripple again, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a breeze. Eleanor, don't do this. Edward's voice broke through again, desperate. Trust me, Eleanor whispered, not looking back at him. Then, to the Countess, I'm ready. The mist extended from the mirror once more, but gently this time, not grasping, but inviting. Eleanor reached out, her fingertips touching the cold glass, which yielded like water beneath her touch. Closing her eyes, Eleanor pushed her hand into the mirror, then her arm, feeling that intense cold embrace her again. She leaned forward, her face nearing the rippling surface. Just before her face touched the glass, she paused. Release him first. Let me see my husband free. The Countess hesitated, then nodded. Edward's body convulsed again, more violently this time, doubling over as if in extreme pain. A silvery mist began to pour from his mouth, his eyes, his ears, the Countess's essence leaving his body. Edward collapsed to the floor, gasping. The mist hovered in the air between him and the mirror, taking on a vaguely human shape, the ghostly outline of a woman in Victorian dress. Now, the spectral Countess said, her voice echoing strangely in the attic, fulfill your part of the bargain. Eleanor looked at Edward, who was struggling to his feet, his eyes clear and his own again. Eleanor, don't, he pleaded. I have to, she said softly. Then, turning back to the mirror, she took a deep breath and plunged forward, pushing herself through the rippling surface. The cold was excruciating, like being submerged in ice water. For a moment, Eleanor couldn't breathe, Couldn't see, couldn't think. Then she was through, standing in what looked like the attic but wrong. The colors muted, the edges blurred, everything seen as if through water. Behind her, the mirror showed the real attic, with Edward staring in horror and the misty form of the Countess floating toward the mirror's surface. "Edward, now!" Eleanor shouted through the glass. "Break it!" Edward hesitated for only a second, then grabbed a heavy wooden chair and swung it at the mirror with all his strength. The Countess screamed as she realized the trap, rushing toward the mirror, her ghostly form stretching and distorting as she tried to return to her refuge. But she was caught between worlds as the chair connected with the glass. From Eleanor's side, the mirror didn't shatter but began to crack, lines spreading across its surface like a spider's web. The Countess's form, half in and half out of the mirror, was torn apart by the fracturing boundary between worlds, her scream rising to an inhuman pitch before abruptly cutting off. The last thing Eleanor saw was Edward's face, his mouth forming her name as the mirror shattered completely, plunging her into darkness. Cold, darkness, silence. Eleanor floated in nothingness, no sense of time or place. Was this death? The mirror world without the mirror to define it? She couldn't tell. Then, gradually, sensation returned. Warmth on her face, a soft surface beneath her body, the sound of a clock ticking nearby, and a voice, Edward's voice, calling her name from very far away. "Eleanor? Eleanor, can you hear me? Please, come back to us." With tremendous effort, Eleanor opened her eyes. She was lying in her own bed, sunlight streaming through the windows. Edward sat beside her, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry, and in his arms was James, awake and gurgling happily. "Edward," her voice was a hoarse whisper. "How?" Edward's face crumpled with relief. "Thank God. You've been unconscious for 3 days. We feared we'd lost you." Eleanor struggled to sit up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "The mirror? The Countess?" "Gone," Edward said firmly. "Both of them. When the mirror shattered, you were thrown across the attic, knocked unconscious. And the Countess, she seemed to disintegrate, torn apart by the breaking of the mirror." Eleanor reached for James, who Edward gently placed in her arms. The baby smiled up at her, his tiny hand grabbing at her hair. "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question. "He's perfectly fine," Edward assured her. "Not a mark on him, not a moment's distress. It's as if the Countess kept her word about not harming him, even as she was destroyed." Eleanor held James close, breathing in his warm, sweet scent. "And you? Are you yourself again?" Edward nodded, though she could see new lines of strain around his eyes. "Completely, though I will never forget what it felt like to be occupied by that entity, to be trapped in the mirror world, watching helplessly as she used my body." He shuddered. "You saved us, Eleanor. Your courage, your quick thinking. We saved each other," Eleanor corrected gently. "And James?" There was a soft knock at the door, and Martha entered, carrying a tray with tea and bread. Her face lit up when she saw Eleanor awake. "Oh, ma'am. Praise be to the saints. We've been so worried." Eleanor smiled weakly. "Thank you, Martha, for everything, for believing me when no one else did." Martha set down the tray and made the sign of the cross. "Some things can't be explained by science, no matter what the doctors say. My grandmother knew it, and now we all do." She hesitated, then added, "The mirror fragments have been buried in the garden, under the old oak tree, with salt and iron, as tradition demands." Edward didn't contradict her or make any scientific objections. He simply nodded. "And the frame has been burned to ash, which we scattered in the river. Nothing remains of it now." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. "Good. It's truly over then." But even as she spoke, a faint sound reached her ears, so soft she might have imagined it, the distant humming of a lullaby and the gentle tapping pattern they had come to know so well. Tap, 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 tap. When she opened her eyes, Edward and Martha were looking at her with concern, obviously having heard nothing. Eleanor forced a smile. "Just tired," she murmured. "I think I need more rest." Later, after Edward and Martha had left her to sleep, Eleanor lay awake, listening. The tapping and humming had stopped, if they had ever been there at all. Perhaps it had been her imagination, her mind still recovering from its ordeal. She turned her head on the pillow, gazing at the dresser across the room where a small hand mirror lay. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of movement in its reflective surface, a pale hand reaching out before vanishing. Eleanor closed her eyes tightly, then opened them again. The mirror showed only the ordinary reflection of the room. Nothing more. Just a dream, she whispered to herself. Just shadows and dreams. But from that day forward, Eleanor Harrington never again kept mirrors in her home. And when James grew old enough to ask why, she would simply smile and say, "Some reflections are best left unseen." This 1897 nursery mirror shows a happy baby until you count the hands holding him. A Shadow Frames production. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Leave a comment telling us what you thought of today's tale and what mysteries from the past you'd like us to explore next. Until next time, remember, some reflections show more than we wish to see.